Hello, everybody, and happy Friday. Welcome to today's Analyzing Finance with Nick live stream. I know it's been a while since I've done one of these, but I have been traveling quite a bit the last few weeks. I was in Australia and in Tampa and in Palm Beach and Scottsdale for the tour um, throughout the month of February, and now I'm back here actually before heading up to Seattle tomorrow. If you'd like to see me there, where I'll be speaking, uh, and I have this live stream is to celebrate really hitting the 100,000 subscriber threshold. As you can see on the right hand, at least on the right hand from me looking at it, might be inverted. You can see my silver play button came in the mail and it's hanging up on my wall here. Um, and I never thought I would really get to this level. It's kind of crazy. When I started this YouTube channel over 4 years ago, I thought, well, it's just a good way to release some of my thoughts on the world. And if I got to 10,000, that'd be awesome. But yeah, I made it to 100,000, which is crazy. I never thought I'd get there. So, and any chance I'd come to Ohio, I went to Cincinnati last summer. I have no plans of going to Ohio this year unless if I get a groundswell of votes, who people who would like me to show up to Ohio. Like the Midwest stops we do have planned are Chicago and Kansas City. If you want to vote on where I go, here's the poll. And I think probably Chicago is the closest event that I'm going to do to Ohio this year, and that's going to be on April 25th. Yeah, so that's kind of my take on that. But to celebrate the 100,000 subscriber level, I'm going to go through all of my bookshelf, and I've done some spring cleaning both here and at um, my parents' house where I got some of my old books and added them to the shelf so I could go through some of my recommended reading and explain what is in here and why. And if you want to ask me specific questions, this is also going to be a Q&A type live stream. However, if you want to ensure that your questions are answered, feel free to leave a super chat. I get tons of questions, and it's unfortunate because there's some really good ones that people ask, but even though I'm reading through all of your comments, sometimes my eyes just miss it live, and I go back to it and I'm like, oh, I really should have answered that question. It would have been a good one, but I miss it. Uh, but really the beginning of this, we'll be going through the books, and I'll talk about plans and future for this channel, and then we will go to questions. So yeah, the first side we're going to talk about here is on the left corner, where we have Orange County Inc., which used to be the book I used to hang on the right section of the shelf, which right now is the ESPN College Basketball Encyclopedia. And I put that there because it's March Madness. And March Madness is the one sports ball event I still kind of care about. And it's that time of year. However, this book came out, I think, almost 20 years ago, so it's probably outdated, but it was a great kind of compendium of everything college basketball at the time before things like Ken Pom and all that stuff came out. But the Orange County Inc. is probably one of my favorite books on this shelf. It's the story of the entrepreneurs and the businessmen who built Orange County. Like Orange County is like an example of a success of entrepreneurship, even like how some cities were entirely planned by the private companies such as notably Irvine and the Irvine Company, and Newport Coast also has a lot of Irvine Company influence too. And it's how basically a variety of different industries and a lot of famous companies you've probably heard of were all started here in Orange County, California. Fortunately, I think the book is out of print, so it's very difficult to find. So I'm fortunate I bought it when I did. The next one is Shadow Men by Anthony Napoleon. it's kind of a conspiracy theory encyclopedia in the sense, and goes through a lot of the popular alternative theories on a lot of ideas in politics, finance, and geopolitics. Um, I know it's not 100% right because their section on the Fed I found to be woefully inaccurate, but it's still an interesting, good coffee table book nonetheless. All right, so somebody asked me about the Expos hat. Um, well, I don't really have any ties to the city of Montreal. I've only been there once, and that was when I was in graduate school a long time ago. And I had a fun time. And my main baseball team that I support is generally the Angels here in Orange County. But I just thought I liked the design of the Expos hat, and I kind of like the irony in a way that they were a no longer existing team, and they had this international cosmopolitan vibe to it, despite relatively little success on the baseball diamond. And I just bought one of these hats before I moved to Asia because I needed more hats. And I just thought it was a cool hat, and I wore it around when I traveled a lot as a result. And that, along with my Angels hat, and it's unique, so I added it to the shelf. There's really not much more of a story for that. However, when I did live in Singapore, there was a French Canadian person who saw me wearing the hat, and he asked me if I was from Montreal, and I was like, "No, I'm not. I just like your hat." And he's like, "Thank you for making my day. I never see anything like this living here overseas as long as I have." And so I guess that's my best story when it comes to the Expos hat. And pardon me if I'm turning around because I can't really read a lot of the titles just looking at the screen. So I might have to like turn around occasionally to read some of these like the captions of some of these books. But the next one we're going to talk about is Stan Weinstein's Secrets for Profiting in Bull and Bear Markets. It's a good technical analysis book. It goes through kind of some of the stages of like charts, patterns, and things. Again, technical analysis is good for risk management. I generally do not recommend trading on it and exclusively. And before I get into this, I'm going to be talking about some finance books. Nothing in this live stream is investment advice. Please do your own due diligence and research before making any investment decisions, or find an advisor to help you with that. And if you have questions specifically for me about anything regarding to investments and portfolio management, or really anything in that category, I recommend you reach out to me directly for questions on your wealth management needs. You can do that either through my consultation form, or you can do it through scheduling a call via Calendly, which is also where I have more general consulting. So now that I need to get out of the way, let's get back to the books. Next one is Golf is Not a Game of Perfect. And it's like a book about psychology. And basically golf kind of reflects a lot of the challenges and struggles of your life, because no matter how hard you practice in playing golf, you're going to occasionally shank a shot. And you have to accept sometimes that things will not go your way and adjust for it. It's a very good sports psychology book, and it's really about golf, but it really is about life too. And that's why I think it's a good read. And even if you're not a golfer, I generally recommend it. The next one we're going to talk about is When Genius Failed by Roger Lowenstein. And this is a book about the story of long-term capital management. And if you're not really familiar with long-term capital management, they're the shop that was one of these big quant funds in the 90s that had one of the guys behind Black-Scholes on their investment team. And they did all these like statistical arbitrage type things. And then when the Asian and Russian financial crisis happened in 1998, it blew up and the Fed bailed them out. And it was a huge mess. It kind of led to the idea of the Fed put indirectly years later. It's a good read just to see how the hubris can basically destroy something that otherwise had a pretty good system, and basically how you can't purely rely on black boxes when doing investments. The next book on here is Innumeracy. And Innumeracy is the book that talks about the social and economic consequences of people not being good at math or understanding basic levels of mathematics. Everybody knows about the problems of illiteracy or people not being able to read or write functionally and how that handicaps you throughout your life. But nobody really talks about how there is the equivalent of that for math. And people's relative innumeracy often leads to very suboptimal economic and financial decisions, particularly with dealing with credit. And if you want to learn more about that, I recommend reading Innumeracy. And let me know if you guys think that this book thing is boring or interesting. Or how much detail should I be going into every one of these, because I haven't done one of these bookshelf reviews in over a year, and I don't want to be putting you guys to sleep here. So the next thing we're going to be talking about is a few psychology books. One is The Guide to Rational Living and Living Like You Mean It. They're not necessarily investment related, but they're more just about how to not let like emotional turmoil or ups and downs of like your mood really impact your life, and about how to live in a way that's authentic. That's what and maintain your mental health in the process. I've read a lot of books about psychology over the years, mainly not just for trading purposes, but also just for dealing with my own challenges when it comes to social psychology and mental health in my teens and my 20s. And yeah, that's kind of my take on that. The next one we're going to talk about is One Up on Wall Street by Peter Lynch. This is one of the first books I read about trading when I was in college. And his basic idea is that the way you make money as an investor is by focusing on things that you know. So say, for example, if your favorite hobby is like computers and gaming, you should focus like a lot of your fundamental investment research on like the semiconductor industry, because you know which chips are actually good and which chips are not. And that's and you can use like your anecdotal knowledge to supplement like purely financial and macroeconomic analysis. He is very anti-global macro himself and paying attention to the economy, but I think his philosophy for bottom-up investing is nevertheless interesting to learn about. Next is a book, Leaving the Legacy by Johann Kurtz. I was mailed to it by one of my subscribers in Arizona, and it was a great read. It's about kind of how to basically once you've made a certain amount of money and you have a plan in your life, or even if like how to transition your values and your work ethic and your culture down to the next generation, and not just among your immediate kids, but like your community around you, leaving a legacy that lasts as long several generations after yourself. This is something now that, given my current stage of life, is something that's become a lot more important to me, because I see a real problem with transmitting values to succeeding generations, starting with the boomers. It's been a structural issue in our society, and I think we need to get back to doing that. All right, mi verda, nonsense. You are giving the perfect amount of detail, because the why is just as important as the what. I'm going to replay later for some good book list. Thank you. Actually, that's a funny story. One book I used to read a lot when I was a kid that was in the guest bathroom for people, I guess, to look at while they were bored before the age of smartphones was this book called The Big Book of Tell Me Why. And literally the entire book was just questions that start with the word why, and then like one paragraph to 2 pages worth of answers answering why. And if you really kind of want to learn more about just anything, the best thing to ask is why. Like, that's why I'm interested in history, because history explains why things are the way they are. So, all right. As a blue collar, I got to 100K in savings and no debt. How to reach the first million in the U.S. economy. Got not much skills. Well, I mean, how long did it take you to save that first 100K? It's basically, at your point, it's a combination of saving and investing. Like if you get a reasonable return, like over a long enough period, and you're contributing like $2,000 plus a month to your savings investment portfolio, you'll get there well before retirement age. But again, it depends on, there's no guarantees in life. It depends on investment returns and how much you're able to save. But it's really simple as that at that point, to get to just 1 million. Like if you're trying to get like generational wealth, like 10 million plus, then you're going to get into the entrepreneurship category. But for getting to your first million, it's really just a combination of disciplined savings and um, investing and getting some return on your capital. Hopefully that answers your question. Um, Next book we're going to be talking about is When Washington Shut Down Wall Street. And it's about basically during the interwar period when the government got a lot more involved in the capital markets and what was the impacts of that. A similar book with more on the central banking focus, which is also a good read, is one called The Lords of Finance, which talks about how central bankers navigated the interwar period mostly poorly, and how the follies of the central banks in the 1920s and 1930s led to a lot of the economic and social crises that ended up causing World War II. It's also a really good read. I listened to that one via audiobook, so that's why it's not on my shelf. And that's why a lot of the newer books generally are not on my shelf, because I've over time transitioned to listening to a lot more audiobooks versus reading them directly, but I still have some hard copies of stuff I've read recently too. Next book I'm going to talk about is Off the Beaten Path, which is a book I wrote actually when I was in college. It was about my time in my semester abroad in Europe, and then also after when I did a family cruise through the Panama Canal. So I covered like 20 something countries in like a few months basically. And it's about my journey. It's not very well written, to be honest, because I wrote it as a 21-year-old college student. And so my writing skills were not nearly as good as they are now, but it was a good archive. And yeah, if you're curious about that kind of thing, you can find it on Amazon. The next book I have on here is Arete, which I haven't really finished yet, by Brian Johnson. It's not really like a full, what's it called, story, but it's more just like these little vignettes about things about self-improvement and persistence and a variety of it. So it's a very thick book, but it's more just like a series of short essays about different topics related to personal development. All right. KC Kool-Aid King, thank you for the $10 and the support. How did you mentally push through the early days of the channel? How did you justify the effort you were putting in when hardly anybody was watching? Did you feel embarrassed? Well, that's a great question. I mean, I had super low expectations, honestly, going into the channel. During the very beginning, I didn't even really release videos every week. It's just basically when I felt like it. And then when I released my first video that kind of gained some traction, it was the reaction to What If Alt hissed that basically we're going to have a Great Depression in 3 years. And this was in 2021. I was proven right on that. We haven't had a Great Depression yet. It's been 5 years almost since I made that video. But nevertheless, that video got a lot of traction and took me from like a 60 subscriber channel, which was mostly just friends and family, to a 350 subscriber channel. And I realized, wait, there's a real audience. People actually care about what I have to say. And just seeing like 1 or 2 comments on each of my videos and seeing the view counts gradually go up, like, it gave me enough reinforcement to keep going. That's the nice thing about YouTube compared to like podcasts or other platforms, is that the analytics are very detailed and you could see it's more visualized, your gradual progress. So it motivates you not to quit. And yeah, I mean, as the channel's grown, I've upgraded the production. Like I never spend more on the channel than I take in financially, because otherwise it would, if I'm running in the red, it would have motivated me to quit a lot faster. So that's maybe why the production company may not be as high as other YouTube channels, but I valued more just my ideas and consistently delivering content than burning out. Um, and yeah, I know I just gradual growth, and I'm like, I just I get competitive. Once I start to see I make progress in something, I strive to do good at it. And so that kept me going. I always wanted to improve it, and I just had several ideas. Like once I started doing this, there were a lot of ideas that popped up of things I wanted to make, and so I made a bunch of these videos and kept releasing them. And the interactions with you guys got me more inspiration to make more content. And yeah, it just kind of kept growing. And then last about about a year and a half ago is when the channel really started to take off, after I made a video called "Why Old Money Supports the Left," which I literally just recorded it in an hour briefly before taking my nephew to go to the merry-go-round at the local mall here. And I thought nobody would care about this really obscure topic, and it basically caused my channel to take off so much that you guys started DMing me about it was time to go tour. So I'm again amazed that I've gotten this far. It's just the thing is, the key for this is just I treat it more as a hobby and a game than like a business. And I'm fortunate I have my real business, which is Spearhead. Um, so that I didn't have that kind of monetary or like short-term pressure to really be big. I And then just my competitiveness and just seeing that there were people who cared. That was probably the biggest driver of why I kept going, is that you guys cared and were interested. And like if I just kept getting like 3 years in 10 views a video, maybe I wouldn't be here anymore. But yeah, thank you guys all for your support and encouraging me to keep going, basically. And yeah, whoever's saying we're in the right second depression right now, like, what is your definition of a depression? Like, a depression is like multiple years in a row of economic contraction, mass unemployment, and like significant drops of living standards. The United States is not in one. Maybe the only country that kind of experienced that in the developed world in the last 20 years is Greece. And there's a risk so that Europe might be there coming into that path. But as of now, apart from what happened in Greece, there's no economy right now in the world that's anywhere close to a Great Depression among the OECD nations. Our next book we're going to talk about is overruled by Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch. And it's basically the idea of like how the legal system is kind of designed in a way that makes that's not really designed in the way that's really reflects the spirit of the law. I'm not really a lawyer, so I'm not going to go into the whole details of it, but it was a good read when I read it, but I don't remember too much about the content beyond that. The next one we're going to talk about is how to create lifetime cash flow through multifamily properties. This book is pretty good about investing in apartment buildings and what you're getting yourself into if you want to be a real estate developer, like, or just be a serious real estate investor. Because like there are people who talk about wanting to buy rental properties all the time, but if you're buying single family homes, there's limited scale, and the often the returns, especially after paying property taxes and maintenance and dealing with the hassle of tenants, aren't worth the squeeze and the hassle versus just buying a REIT, or and when interest rates are at normal levels, just putting your money in the fixed income market. I mean, there are tax benefits to real estate, but the way to do it, if you really want to be a serious real estate investor, is go in the multifamily route. But then again, you're turning in from you're not going to be like a casual landlord. This is you're going to be a business owner at that point. And it kind of made me realize, like, I can't just say, oh, I'm running my RA and I'm on the side going to be just buy a few apartment buildings. I'd have to treat it more like a full-time business. Um, and I've already got like my main business, and then YouTube is kind of my main secondary thing I'm doing. So I don't know if I would have the time to be an apartment landlord, but nevertheless, it's very good if you want to learn about what you're getting yourself into and how to do it. I recommend that book. Next one we're going to talk about is Martin Zweig's Winning on Wall Street. It's similar to the book that I talked about earlier. So Stan Weinstein, Marty Zweig's another one of these great technical chartists from back in the day, like 80s and 90s. So yeah, that's my take. It's another good technical. And it's not, a lot of this stuff is not perfectly correlated to the modern world, but there's still good insights to improve your technical trading. The next one we're going to talk about is The Great Rupture by Victor Schvetz. And it is a book about his geopolitical views and how they're going to affect global macro forces at the time he wrote it. I'm not familiar with Schvetz. He's a sell-side analyst for Macquarie, talking about a lot of more global macro stuff from an esoteric perspective. It's kind of a combination of your typical Wall Street sell-side analyst and me in terms of like the type of content, with written content in his case, you're going to get. I find his reading to be very interesting. And if you do have access to street research, I recommend reading Schvetz. The next one is The Confidence Game. And it's about like how con artists use certain psychological tactics to get certain affinities developed for them. I think it's more useful to watch out for me having to deal with people trying to con me. But yeah, it's a good book, really. Also, just about, you can use the lessons from that to just improve your general social skills as well. Next book we're going to be talking about is Saints in the World by, I think it's Jose Urtiaga, the founder of Opus Dei. And this is a book that is about really the philosophy of Opus Dei, which is a order within the Catholic Church. And it's their idea is that you don't have to be like a member of the clergy, or you don't have to be some like poor monk who gave away all his possessions and lives in deep poverty to be a holy person. You can be holy in whatever you do in your life, whether that's you're a lawyer, a doctor, a financial professional, a blue-collar tradesman, a family person, whatever. And that's kind of the idea of of this book. And you can be a saint really by just living a way that reflects like Catholic values and applying the ethics of your faith into your secular profession and your purpose outside of the church. So that is my take on that. The next book we're going to talk about is The Next Perfect Trade by Alex Gorevich. His theory is basically that there's this correlation that you should be buying. There's like a feedback loop of like strong dollar leads to like risk in EM in certain environments, which leads to capital flowing to bonds, which leads to strong dollar. I'm not really certain that it's something that perpetually holds, but if you want an interesting thesis from another macro thinker, I recommend checking it out. Next one I'm going to talk about is Liberty and Integrity by George B. Free. This is a political philosophy book about how to reform the right-wing side of politics. It was written shortly after the election of President Trump and goes into things like monetary policy, inflation, foreign policy, etc., from a more like, it's a perspective that acknowledges the issues of the neocon era and the old establishment, but at the same time doesn't get destroyed by class grievances that cause a lot of problems in right-wing populism. So if you want an interesting book on political philosophy, I highly recommend checking out Liberty and Integrity. Next book we're going to talk about is Johnny Carson by Henry Bushkin. This is one of the most recent reads. My father actually gave this to me to read before I went to Australia. And it's about the life of Johnny Carson. I mean, I don't really know. Probably none of you are familiar with Johnny Carson. If you're familiar with Johnny Carson, please write a comment, because I thought he was before my time. And I'm probably older than a lot of you guys who are watching this live stream. Johnny Carson was, if you're not familiar, was originally from Nebraska. He moved to New York and became I don't know if he's the first host, but he's definitely the most famous host of NBC's The Tonight Show. From I think 1968 to 1992 was his time frame. I might be wrong on the years for that. And but yeah, he had a long run. It was literally my dad's favorite TV show that wasn't sports during that time frame. Again, I was barely alive when he retired, so I've never really seen him live or anything like that. But apparently, he was the super big celebrity, and like back when talk show hosts actually people cared about what they had to say. But he wasn't very political. He's just more of a comedian. And then, but his personal life was not really a reflection of how he portrayed himself on stage. Like, he comes off this affable, like easygoing, friendly guy on TV, but in his real life, he had a lot of struggles and mental health things, and lived a very crazy, wild lifestyle that you would have associated with a different kind of celebrity than Mr. All-America Johnny Carson. And it talks about, from the perspective of his lawyer at the time, like how he was able to leverage his fame to make a lot more money than simply his TV contract, and just all the personal drama of having to basically be the handler for Johnny Carson in that period. Again, I just think it's just, and I don't really learn a lot in terms of like actionable things for like my investment philosophy, but it was a very interesting and entertaining read. And it gives you kind of an idea of like kind of what Hollywood and high society was like in the 70s and the 80s as well. Next book I'm going to talk about is The Hour Between the Dog and the Wolf by John Coates. This one is about risk and about the psychological and physiological effects that people deal with when the ups and downs of the market, and when they take big risks, or like, and all the psychological behavioral things about it, from like a more biological perspective. Next book, we're talking about Hot Commodities by Jim Rogers. I mean, the commodities markets have evolved a lot since this book was written, so some of it might be outdated. But Jim Rogers, if you guys don't know, and how many of you guys are familiar with Jim Rogers, please write that in the chat, because I'm curious how often I'm going to be aging myself when I do these. But Jim Rogers, if you guys do not know who he is, was George Soros' first right-hand man when they started the Quantum Fund. It was one of the first hedge funds, like in the 70s. And Rogers was more of a fundamental analyst, particularly had expertise on commodities and international stocks, where Soros was more of a macro technical trader. And they made a really good team and had really good returns. And then Rogers retired in the 90s. And and then ever since then, he moved to Singapore with his wife and his young daughters, because he was one of these kind of people who believe that the East was going to replace the West, and wrote a book about that too, actually. And there's one, and he also wrote a book about his travels called Investment Biker. But Jim Rogers is an interesting guy. He knows a lot about commodities, so it kind of goes in the primer of that. And that's really it. And I think he's a little bit older than a boomer, honestly. Next one we're going to talk about is The Alchemy of Finance by George Soros. George Soros is one of these interesting figures. I've talked about him on my iceberg, where on one hand, like his ideological beliefs, I really dislike them for the most part, and especially if you go down to what he's really trying to convey. There's a book called Soros on Soros, and you can read the last chapter of it. There's an interview I think he had with Charlie Rose. It's an excerpt that kind of goes into what his actual ideology is on the politics side. But The Alchemy of Finance is more useful for the trading side. And this is why you got to separate sometimes people, one side of a person from another. Because even if I don't like Source's ideology, I can learn a lot from what he says about markets. And he goes into this book about the concept of reflexivity, which is the idea that price action often changes the fundamentals of the underlying asset. So, example, say for you buy a stock, the stock price goes up. The stock price going up causes investors to have more confidence. And because of that, the company can borrow at a lower interest rate from the bank or from the bond market. And because of that, they're able to get more capital to invest in growth. And because they invest in growth, the stock will continue to go up. And then this is a reflexive cycle that compounds on the way up. It also works on the way down. And the alchemy of finance kind of goes more into the mechanics behind this, but that's kind of just a general summary of reflexivity. The next book I'm going to talk about is The Rise of Carry by Lee and I forgot their first names, honestly, but it's a book about carry trades in the 2000s and 2010s and how they influence international finance. It's an interesting read. Next book is The Show. It's like a informal biography of the people involved, players, executives, coaches, etc., of the Los Angeles Lakers. I used to be really big into sports in my teens and 20s, and Lakers were my favorite team of any professional sport. And yeah, they have a lot of, it's kind of like the Johnny Carson book, except instead of about a single person, it's about everybody involved with the Lakers. You said do entrepreneurship. What fields do you recommend? Also, should I use 100K savings or another way to finance it? It depends on your talents and your skills. Basically, what I recommend for entrepreneurship is to find a problem like in the industry that you're already a professional in, that you think you can solve better or cheaper than the competition, and solve that pain point. Again, if you want more details on that, like I can't help you a specific situation for your own self. So if you want more specific type of advice, I recommend contacting me directly and scheduling a call or a conference, it's investments or anything else you need, because I can't go too much into the weeds on the air. So the next book we're going to be talking about is How to Make Money in Stocks by Will O'Neill. And it's about the can slim method of finding quality growth stocks. And it is a little mix of technical factors too. It's a good read. You can't really build an entire portfolio based on can slim, but it gives you another factor to think about in terms of your stock picking. Next thing we're going to talk about is a book called The Faith Explained. It's just a really kind of a summary of Catholicism, if for those who are interested in it. Next book we're going to be talking about is They Made America by Harold Evans, which I also used to have on the right corner of the shelf. They Made America is a book about, it's kind of like Orange County Inc., except instead of just Orange County, it's all of the United States of America. And it goes into entrepreneurs such as the Fultons, who are involved in building the steamship in the old days, to the Vanderbilts, to Rockefeller, all the way to modern day, where they go into the stories of people like Bill Gates. And I think the story of Bill Gates in this book is probably the most fascinating story of all the entrepreneur ones in They Made America. And I'm not going to spoil it. For those who have read this book and know about the rise of Microsoft, you might have a different opinion than the general narrative is about the rise of Microsoft. But I do recommend reading this. It was a required textbook for mine in entrepreneurship class in college, and I've kept it because it was a great read overall. So that's kind of the top row. So now I'm going to move on to the next row. And then also, I already talked about the ESPN College Encyclopedia, but the wine bottle in the back is a picture from myself and my colleague Murphy when we spoke at the first Newport Beach meetup in January of 2025. And I kind of kept this as a memento, even though I personally do not drink. So the next level, I don't think you might be able to see it here on the shelf, but I will just read them for you. The first one is the $1 Million Financial Services Practice. It's a book about how to build the business side of a wealth management firm and about how to get clients, how to run the practice side of things, all that kind of stuff. So if you ever like want to start an RIA or work in that world, it's a book I recommend reading. The next one is Chicago Architecture and Design. It's kind of a coffee table book about all the noteworthy buildings in the city of Chicago. I think Chicago is probably the most interesting city in America in terms of architecture. It's my favorite city architecturally in the U.S. I think San Francisco also has, and New York also are pretty good on that front. But I would say, like, for the best skyline in America, Chicago, and it goes into like the history and all the unique buildings in greater Chicagoland, if that's something you're interested in. And yes, I did start at 4 p.m. Pacific time. Next thing is we're going to talk about on the bookshelf is World Order by Henry Kissinger. And it's a book about just kind of how the detente post like Nixon like world order kind of developed and a lot of geopolitical relationships. This book came out in the mid 2010s. So I think like the election of President Trump and the rise of populism and authoritarianism in various parts of the world have kind of changed the geopolitical calculus that was in that world order book. Yeah. All right. If I was appointed the Secretary of the Treasury, what would I do differently than what the current administration is doing? Well, I mean, I think it depends who my boss is at the secret. Like, honestly, how much leeway I got. I mean, in general, I would not be as excited to lower rates as the current administration is. I generally think that artificially lowering interest rates causes more problems than it solves in the long run. And I would try to reform the tax, but I need legislative. A lot of the proposals I have need legislative approval, but I would try to reform the tax code in a way that is not as harsh against work and younger people on the rise trying to build careers and more in favor of taxing real estate and consumption. I think the income tax is just not an efficient way to raise money for a government, and it is also causes a lot of suboptimal behavior to avoid it. I think it's better to just tax things that are a lot harder to try to work around, and also I think higher property taxes discourage housing speculation, which is a problem in our society and most Western societies. But otherwise, I think Bessent is doing generally a really good job. I think he's probably the most competent member of Trump's cabinet. So again, I haven't really thought, I also haven't dived into what every single responsibility of the Secretary of Treasury is. So depending on what they need me to do, I'd have to look and see how I would do it the same or differently. Next super chat. Thanks. Basic question, but what is actually happening in the pre-market and after hours? What exactly are institutions doing to cause such wild price action? It's basically they're just making markets, but they're not doing anything nefarious. The reason why you see more wild moves in the pre-market and after hours because there's less people participating. So if you get like a big inflow and there's not a lot of sellers, you're going to see a giant gap up. And the other way around, like if there's a bad earnings report and there's a big institution who wants to dump it, there might not be anybody to take the other side of that trade. And so that's why. And a lot of the after hours trading is chaotic because you just have these orders that come in and there's not really as many people on the other side to take it. So it leads to more choppy trading. But there's not, I don't think institution, that's basically what's going on there. And it's not like the exact, like purely mechanical explanation, but just in like basic English. That's really the pre-market and after hours. It's just when you have less volume and less liquidity, you get more disjointed markets. You see the same thing with like very thinly traded like ETFs or closed end funds or pink sheets, which are like international stocks that are listed on the exchange but don't have an ADR. You get that same kind of like intraday price action just because there's just not as much people participating in the market. Next book we're going to talk about is Dead Companies Walking by Scott Fearon. He was a short seller in the Bay Area in the 2000s, and it's about how to find companies that are good short selling candidates. And if you're a long focused investor, how to avoid companies that are likely to drop because of shaky fundamentals. There's also another good book about this called Financial Shenanigans by Howard Shillett, which goes more into like the accounting side of this. But yeah, next book we're going to talk about is The 3 Laws of Performance. And it's about like the certain traits that you can have in turn to be more effective in how you do work and how you present yourself in the world to be more successful. It's just really about like basically how to be more conscientious. Next book we're going to be talking about is 177 Mental Toughness Secrets of the World by Steve Seibold, which is again about a book about certain things that you can do to improve your mental toughness and resiliency. I read this in a relatively hard time in my life where I felt like I was being beaten down by the world, and I wanted to learn how to be more resilient and handle when bad things happen to me a little bit better instead of crumpling like a piece of paper. So if you want a book about mental toughness, that's a book about mental toughness. Next one we're going to talk about is The Hidden Europe by Francis Tappan. This is a book that was written about 20 years ago or so, and it was about this guy Francis, who I've met at the Saturday Salon, for all you guys know. And he is a world traveler. He's famous for having records for walking the longest distances between certain points in the world and traveling to a lot of countries on very small budgets. And he wrote a book about his time traveling through basically all of Europe, east of Stockholm, basically. So like Finland, the eastern half of Germany, and what all of the former Iron Curtain countries, and throw in Greece and Turkey as well. And it was a good read. It's about his adventures through it and some of the cultural differences in each of these places. As the world has become more globalized, some of those cultural differences have somewhat faded away. But if you want to learn more about the eastern half of Europe, it's a good read. Next book is Clemente by Dave Moranis. Clemente is the story of Roberto Clemente, who was a famous baseball player for the Pittsburgh Pirates, who also was a humanitarian, and he hit his 3,000th hit, I think was his last hit or something pretty close to it. And then he went on a plane to fly from Puerto Rico, I think, to Central America to do some humanitarian work, and the plane crashed and he passed away tragically. And it's just about his life story from being born in poverty to making the major leagues to giving back to the Latin American community. It's a good read. I also like a book called When Pride Still Mattered, which is written by the same author, about the life of the football coach of the Green Bay Packers, Vince Lombardi. Next one we're going to talk about is The Myth of the Rational Voter. And the myth of the rational voter is the idea that basically people don't vote rationally. There's a similar book written in a more cynical way called What's the Matter with Kansas? But this one is more just goes into the actual like behavioral economics of it. And it talks about basically how there are certain logical fallacies that voters consistently do in elections. And because of that, you have a general idea how public opinion will be on just about any issue. Like the typical voter generally is for lower taxes, but at the same time, higher social welfare spending. They are for, let's just say, in theory, more economic freedom, but want protectionism for their specific industries. Like there's all these contradictions that it makes it why political coalitions are so fragile in the US, because you'll have one party run on something and they want all the perks of it, but whenever you try to put the real consequences of those policies, then all of a sudden they're like, oh, I didn't support that, I'm going to go vote for the other party who's not going to force these kind of these tough consequences that were the product of the choice you previously said you were for. But yeah, that's the myth of the rational voter. Next book I'm going to talk about is The Definitive Guide to Emerging Market Currencies. It was another book I wrote when I was in my early 20s about emerging market currencies. I think a lot of it is outdated because the book is now about 2012 and it's become a lot more liquid and easier to trade emerging market currencies. But it's a good primer on EMFX if you're curious about that. Next one we're going to talk about is what's it called? End the Fed by Ron Paul, and it's basically the case of why the Federal Reserve should be abolished. The next one we're going to talk about, I already talked about it unintentionally, was When Pride Still Mattered by about the life of Vince Lombardi. Next, we're going to get into the final shelf of books here that I'm going to discuss, and then we're going to get to Q&A. And we're going to talk about first is Quality of Earnings by Thornton O'Glove. And it's an older book, but it's about how to assess like earnings quality and whether like a company's actually making their EPS actually means they're truly profitable or their EPS is a matter of financial engineering. Next book we're going to talk about is Creating and Delivering Your Value Proposition. And it's a book about, again, explaining like what your unique USP is. Like, why should somebody use your company over somebody else's? Or if you're in the corporate world, why should you be the one hired for a job or get a promotion over your competitor? The next one we're going to talk about is What Story Are You Living by Carol Pearson and Hugh Marr. It's actually a workbook, and it talks about the 12 archetypes of people and how they have their own versions of their hero's journey. And you could kind of read it and figure out like what resonates with you. And then based off of that, how you should pursue your life if you're a agentic person who wants to just not just roll with the motions. It's a little bit esoteric and semi-spiritual, but it was good for me going through that to help me kind of give me some perspective when I was a relatively lost point in my life. Next one we're going to talk about is Natenberg on Options. Natenberg is kind of a book that just is most option traders get or analysts to get when they start working at an options firm. And it's about the basic fundamentals of the options market, the types of option strategies, how volatility works, et cetera, et cetera. It's kind of like level 1. And then level 2 is dynamic hedging, which I don't have on this shelf, by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. And it's about like how to trade vol trading, like you're betting on movements of volatility and delta hedging and all that kind of stuff. It was probably one of the harder books that I've read on finance, dynamic hedging. Now, the other hard book I've read on finance is the one about distressed debt analysis, which goes into how to figure out like post-bankruptcy or companies that are on the rocks and how to figure out like whether it's worth buying their high yield debt and the restructuring process and all that. Like those two are not beginner level finance books. That's like the S level. The next one we're going to talk about is Fooling Some of the People All the Time by David Einhorn, which is about his story with some of his short selling adventures and trades and things like that as a hedge fund manager. It's a good read. Next one we're going to talk about is Monetary Regimes and Inflation by Peter Bernholtz, which is a book about monetary policy and kind of how it works and inflation and all that. Your thoughts on on the late Scott Adams, who said that economic and financial predictions are just astrology with numbers. I mean, you could see that people could see that way because you're not going to ever get 100% of things right. But there are people who do get consistent, like the things like 50 to 60% right. And you can make money also, even if you only get 30 to 40% things right, as long as you risk manage correctly so that you make multiples of your money when you're right and lose only a small amount when you're wrong. So basically, I don't really think there are rational things you can do to make economic predictions, but again, the more bigger and bolder claims you are, the more a lot of it is just kind of like either political narrative to try to push a certain ideology, and I've done a video about that, or just kind of like baseless speculation. Like it's very difficult, for example, to predict like the GDP growth of every country in the year 2036. Like I don't think anybody can do that with a straight face. But at the same time, you can look at existing fundamentals in the economy and the markets and extrapolate certain things. Otherwise, we wouldn't really have a capital market. How do people make investment decisions? Like there's more to it than just throwing darts on a wall. Next thing we're really going to talk about is Prisoners of Geography by Tim Marshall. And it's a geopolitics book about how basically geography shapes the destiny of countries. Like we're seeing that in recent news today, that basically the fact that most of the oil market is stuck in, not most, but a large chunk of it is stuck in the Persian Gulf, which has a very small exit in the Strait of Hormuz, is influencing a lot of what's going on in the world right now. So, and that's just one example of many. And it says like why certain countries are more likely to succeed because of certain geographical features, no matter what the culture or the people are there, and why others are more likely to fail for the same reasons. The next book we're going to talk about is The Sovereign Individual, which I think somebody asked about in the chat. And the sovereign individual is this idea that the Reformation was the disruptor of religion, and the printing press is what allowed the disruption of established religion in the Catholic Church. And they're arguing that the internet and all the technology surrounding the internet is the modern day version of the printing press. And instead of disrupting religion, it's going to disrupt government. And that the idea of like these big nation states that operate the world today are going to be outcompeted and become obsolete due to technology. They've gotten some things in that book right, and other things that not right. And AI actually might be a point for the big organized states up to a point. But I think one of the good lessons of sovereign individual, and I think the AI revolution is exposing this to a certain degree, is that it's not going to be about just number of people that makes a country geopolitically and militarily successful anymore. It's about whether the people in your country have a level of intelligence and human capital and creative thinking to better use the leverage of technology than others. And there's two different eras of history. There's eras of history where technology is relatively evenly distributed. And in those eras, it's usually the countries with the largest absolute populations tend to be the most successful ones because everybody has relatively the same technology. So you can just outman your opponent. And that was kind of what the world was like. Maybe 2000 to 2023 was an era of technology converging around the world. The gap between the least developed countries and the most developed countries technologically was shrinking rapidly. But now I think with AI, it's kind of the reverse, where a lot of it is more proprietary and it's not being equally distributed across the world. Some people have better AI models and agents and things than others do. In robotics, the similar thing. It's not evenly distributed. There are current countries that have major technological advantages. And the countries with technological advantages, when the gap between the most technologically advanced and the least technology advanced, or the middle technology advanced, widens, that's when population size is no longer the driver of geopolitical success, but it's more the application of technology. Like the example, this would be like the 19th and early 20th century when Europe had a major technological advantage versus the rest of the world. And as a result, they were able to colonize the rest of the world. And it wasn't really until the world wars and the Cold War encouraged sharing of technologies, particularly military technology across the world, that the colonial powers lost grip. And so is there a link to get tickets to my events? Yeah, I was going to share that with you after I did the books. But in general, there's like an Eventbrite where I'm hosting all of these events. So you can go and see all the ones that are upcoming. And I will go into the full list pretty soon. But I just wanted to list, like, here's the since you asked, here's just the link with all of my upcoming events. There's 10 left that are scheduled, and I'm going to schedule probably more of them later this year because I'm going to take a break in the summer for some personal reasons. But yeah, that's the link right there for all of them. And then I'll send individual ones later. The next book we're going to talk about is The Right Exit Strategy by Bruce Wright. And it's about like the process of selling a company and exiting and how to do that in a way that maximizes the value you get out of an exit, whether personally, financially, etc. Next book we're going to talk about is Red Notice by Bill Browder. It's a book about Bill Browder, who was this fund manager who invested a lot in Russia right after the fall of the Soviet Union, and about how Western Western financiers got involved in investing in Russia and the challenges of that and the opportunities of that, and how once Putin got in charge, they were forced out. And yeah, it's an interesting story. And it kind of explains the context of why Russia in the 90s developed the way it did compared to other countries in the Eastern Bloc after the Cold War. Next book we're going to be talking about is Getting the Best of It by Slansky. This is a book actually about gambling, but about like how to get edges and things like sports betting and cards and things like that. But the main lesson to really, I was given it to read when I was working on the options desk, because you can apply a lot of the mindsets of that kind of approach, even though I'm not a gambler myself, and I definitely do not endorse it, into trading and investing. So that's why I think it's a good read. The next one we're going to talk about is Notes on the Death of Culture by Mario Vargas Llosa. It's like a series of essays about like cultural decay and how social things change. He's come from his perspective in Latin America. Again, I read this book over a decade ago, and so I don't really remember a lot of the actual content, but I found it interesting enough when I read it to keep it on the shelf. Next one we're going to talk about is Influence, Science, and Practice by Robert Cialdini. This book is a good book. It's like the top book that sales professionals should probably read. It's about persuasion and like the academic research to show how you actually can effectively change people's minds. If I was a little bit more extroverted, this probably could have been used to help me get into the counter elite a lot faster than I eventually will, because my main weakness of me personally in my career is my sales skills or lack thereof. Like if I was a good salesman, I bet my firm would be 5 to 10 times the size it is now. But nevertheless, if you want a good primer to learn about this, and every entrepreneur needs to have basic communication and sales skills if they want to have a chance at getting off the ground, I highly recommend reading Influence. The next book is Lawrence in Arabia. It's about the British involvement in the Middle East during World War I. It's a play on the movie Lawrence of Arabia, the title. Interesting read if you want to learn more about like pre-World War II Middle Eastern history. Then I have two board games there. One is Ticket to Ride, which is a fun one where you build trains to connect either Europe or North America, depending on which map that you'd have. And the next one, I also have Where in the World, which is a geography trivia game, which You basically have a empty continent map with a bunch of numbers, and you do a spinner, and depending on what card you draw and what you spin, you either have to name what the country is, its capital, its GDP, its main exports, language, religion, etc. It's a fun way to learn about geography, but yeah. And geography is probably, and history are my second and third most interesting topics for me to learn about, other than finance and economics. And that kind of wraps up the books section of this live stream. And the next thing we're going to talk about is just our general Q&A and future plans for the channel. So if you want to ask questions, now is the time to put them in. So by the time I'm actually going to read them, I have questions to actually read. Okay. So like I never thought I would get to 100,000 subscribers. So I'm kind of on playing with house money and on cloud 9 here in terms of like what I expect for the channel. I don't really have any hard subscriber goals anymore. However, I did mention in a post, if I hit certain subscriber benchmarks, I will do special meetups in exotic locations and that I would maybe not normally go. So you guys, I guess, have that to look forward to. Like the next ones of these are going to be 150K for Quebec City at the probably I'll do it at the Chateau de Frontenac in the Fairmont Hotel. And if we get to 200,000, I was originally going to do a Mexico tour, but given the recent turmoil going on there, that might have to be postponed. I might swap it for a Caribbean meetup. But yeah, and then if we get to 1 million, which is the gold play button, I will do a special meetup in Kodiak Island, Alaska, because when I was at 1,000 subscribers, somebody asked me, would I ever do a meetup in Kodiak Island, Alaska? And I jokingly respond, if I ever get to 1 million subscribers, I will go to Kodiak Island. So yeah, I'm going to keep doing the tour. Like my plan is to do the cities that are upcoming. The next one is tomorrow, actually, of all times, tomorrow evening in Seattle, Washington. So, and then the next one is going to be after Seattle, we are going to San Francisco on March, what's it called? 28th. And I'm also going to do a private dinner the day after in Montecito, California, which is by Santa Barbara. And if you're interested, I'm all on top of all these meetups. I do now private dinners where like a group of like, it's anywhere from like 5 to 12 people will meet up for a private dinner with me. And we kind of extend the conversation beyond the meetups, usually at a nicer restaurant in town. And it's a fun way to get to know everybody better and make good connections. As these meetups get bigger, it's harder for me to talk to everybody when I speak. So I added these. And if you're interested in going to a private dinner, here's the link to the application. So fill that out in any of the cities that we're coming. And if your city's not on there, just write in the other section, like a city that you would want me to do it in the future. So the format of the meetup is basically the first 30 minutes are people just kind of mingling, because I know people come late to these things due to traffic. And then I have an opening speaker speak about a certain topic. The opening speaker depends on where we're going and a variety of other factors. Or sometimes I don't have an opening speaker and it's just straight to me and I'll do 2 speeches. And then after the opening speaker, they have Q&A. Then I speak, and then I have a longer Q&A. And then it's just people can chat amongst themselves after my speech until we leave to go to the private dinner. So that's kind of how the format is for the meetups generally. It's myself and another speaker and the community that we have. And as you've seen, I've done a lot of videos recently from my speeches. Like the one I did about the silver economy is when I spoke at Scottsdale. The one I did about how governments fix affordability crisis was my meetup in Sydney, Australia. And my video about why cities are becoming boring due to high cost of living was live from my Beverly Hills event. So yeah, that's my explanation of the format. And then after in April, we're going to be also going to the East Coast. I'm going to Toronto, and the speech on that is like, is the economy and the global macroeconomic force is going to break up the country of Canada? If you want to know my thoughts on the future of Canada as a country, economically and politically, come to Toronto. That's where I'm going to discuss it. I try to theme the speeches somewhat locally to the places I'm going. And then that's on Thursday, April 9th. And then on Saturday, April 11th, we are going to back to Boston, Massachusetts. And then on the 14th of April, I will be speaking live in New York City. So that's going to be the Northeast for this year. And then I'm going to be going to Atlanta for the first time, because that's the city that you guys wanted me to see the most last year that I didn't. And Atlanta will be on Thursday, April 23rd in Buckhead. And then we are going to have a meetup in Chicago in the Lincoln Park area on Saturday, the 25th of April. And then the last official meetup that I have scheduled is going to be in Dallas on April 30th. I think that's a Thursday. And then we're also going to have a more informal meetup, which is kind of a party to celebrate me visiting all 50 U.S. states in Kansas City, Kansas on I think it's that Sunday. So I think it's the 2nd or the 3rd of May. So that's the link to Kansas City. And if your city wasn't on there and you want to have a say of where I go, feel free to vote in this poll here. You can vote whether I want to have a curated experience, which is the private dinner, or just the main meetup. And I'll probably do in the second half of the year, go to Denver. And I might go to Las Vegas because some people reached out to me to help me set up an event there. Santa Cruz, California, Portland, Oregon, and probably Austin, Texas, and in Houston. So those will be the ones that, and if the channel grows quicker than expected, then Quebec City and Montreal and maybe DC. So those are the kind of the ideas where you expect me for the second half of this year if I do continue the tour after May. And then for 2027, the goal is to do a Latin American and European tour. And if you guys want to have a say of where I go to Latin America or Europe, feel free to vote in that poll. How many people are attending Seattle? Well, it's about probably me twice the size of the event last year. So it's a significant amount of people. It's well over 20. But you never know at the last minute with these kind of things. So as of the tour, my plan is for Europe and Latin America next year. And then 2028 and beyond, I'll probably just have like 8 to 10 core cities that I go to. And I have an idea of what those are, but I will share that another time. Other than beyond the tour, what I plan to do in the channel is I continue to make interesting content that I think you guys find worthwhile. I'll probably keep my 2 videos a week release schedule. And I'm also going to be probably putting more stuff on my Substack. So if you guys want to keep updates on meetups or have the videos email you directly or some other written content or bonus content, you can join my Substack. And with the members, I also have a members program for the channel. I release some videos that are either kind of not fully in theme with analyzing with the main channel, or like little excerpts that just didn't really fit, or more stuff that's a little bit too controversial to put on the main channel. I often has members only videos, and you can get those either by becoming a member here on YouTube or through my Substack. And if you join the free version of the Substack, you get an email that will welcome email include a free downloadable PDF that has all of my recommended reading list about economics, finance, and social class. And then I've also I'm going to do more shorts, but not here on the main channel. I'm going to keep the shorts to once a week or less, but you'll be able to find all my short videos on my other social media, such as my X, which is the link here. I'll put them on my Instagram, which is, I have a personal one, which people try to follow, but I'm keeping that private. But I have a YouTube one. It's at AF with Nick for my, the channel's Instagram, where I'll post my reels, and also on my LinkedIn too. So if you want to see more short form content, that's where I'm going to put it. And I don't want to flood this channel with shorts. And I'm going to try to keep doing live streams. I'm going to target about once a month, but it often depends on like my travel schedule. Like I think a few of them I'm considering for topics for live streams about healthcare. And I might also do one about the poly crisis, which is the idea that there's a lot of different economic, political, and social crises happening all at once now, and why that's the case or why it's not the case. But I think those are probably two ideas I might do for future live streams. Yeah, that's kind of where my goal direction for the channel is. I'd like to keep growing the channel. And my other goals in my life is that I hope that I have that my wedding goes smoothly and I have a happy marriage. And then with my business, that I continue to grow Spearhead and propel that as well. So that's kind of my goals for the channel. It's just to continue to make good content and expand my reach a little bit through sharing the short form on other platforms, and just let's then see where it goes. Like so now that I've kind of explained kind of some future plans for the channel, now I'm going to get to your questions. I'm going to try to scroll up and read them, but if you want to ensure that your question is answered, please leave a super chat, because a lot of your questions get lost in the woods here. It's hard to catch up with all these comments. Do you have thoughts on creative industries and projects? Entertainment, movies, books, etc. What do you mean? Like, does it make financial sense to get into those? Am I planning on making any myself? I'm not really sure what you're asking with that question. So, yeah. Let's see. From the suggestions you've gathered, are you planning on picking just one or exploring multiple? I really feel like YouTube lacks good videos on clear development that aren't shallow. What do you mean by the suggestions? You're talking about suggestions for topics? Like, I mean, I don't try to give too much career advice because I'm not an expert in every career path. I have a very unorthodox career path, which is an entrepreneur in finance. Most financial people don't really try to build businesses. They usually get a good job at a buy side shop, a sell side shop, or a wealth manager, and kind of get their good salary and bonus and kind of ride that wave. So like the entrepreneurial side and the finance side are kind of unique things that may not apply to a lot of other people, but I try to use just my common knowledge and seeing the trajectory of my own career, other careers of people I know, and just use like my knowledge of economic forces to try to give good ideas of where to go for that. I'll probably do them occasionally. Like I make maybe like, I don't know, 2 to 3 career videos a year at least. But it's just whenever I feel like I have something unique to say that you can't just look up on ChatGPT. Because in the age of LLMs, like there's no point in making like a generic type of advice video. I need to only do stuff where like my actual insight is interesting enough that you can't just look it up yourself through an AI. Yeah. So let's now scroll up and see some of the comments that have questions. Is IB the only option for private equity, real estate, etc.? Just curious. For private equity, investment banking is the most reliable path to get there because you're going to have to be doing a lot of those deals as one of the participants versus the broker and the intermediary, which is the investment banker. So if you're trying to get into private banking, investment banking probably is the best path for that. But for like real estate and other buy side investing, you don't need to go into the investment banking route. But yeah, it's a good pipeline for private equity. Um, let's see. Why political and geopolitical news is a distraction video? When is that coming out? I will probably release it in the next week or two. I have recorded it, but I'm in the process of post production. Um, hey Nick, do you have a Goodreads account or someone we can see all the books you recommend? I don't. I have a Goodreads account that I made a long time ago, but I don't really use it. What I've done instead is that I made when everybody joins my free version of my Substack, there's a PDF that includes like the top 100 books. And if somebody ever finishes all of those and emails me saying, Nick, I read every single one of those books, then I will come back and update it. Nobody is really, I've given you guys enough to start with that you can work with that. So that's the place to find them. Is A Walk Down Wall Street still the first book you would recommend to a newbie? No, it's not. Because I think that's just a book about random walk thesis and efficient markets. It's actually not what I'd recommend at all. Yeah, that's. Have you read For Profit: A History of Corporations? No, I have not read that book. Let's see. Is Christianity a psyop? No, it's not a psyop. Like the whole establishment of Christianity and its development was despite a government that was trying to suppress it the whole time. And it didn't really spread to its level of becoming the dominant religion of the Roman Empire through violence or conquest or force. Let's see. I'm glad some other people remember Johnny Carson. Well, yeah. I did do a video about geopolitics and investing a long time ago when the Ukraine invasion was happening. So you can kind of watch that if you're looking for more content related to that. Does anybody want to cruise the Kentucky Parkway? I think that's a joke. I don't really know what you're referring to with the Kentucky Parkway anyway. Is that like the racetrack out there? Let's see. What do you think about quantitative trading? I mean, it can work. It's basically systematizing a lot of the technical analysis and sentiment analysis that people used to do by hand and now have an algorithm do it for them. But a lot of it is a black box. So you don't really know why your thing is necessarily working, which is the challenge with it. I think you can use a lot of systematic stuff. It's very important for defining and managing risk. But I still like to have a discretionary element in picking what I invest in and why. Because if you have the fundamentals on your side and you have a positive technical profile, it probably means better returns in the long run. But again, there's no guarantees for that either. Let's see. How do you suggest to learn more about personal finance? Well, there's a lot of ways. There's a lot of good content creators who talk about the basics of personal finance. You can read like Investopedia. And then you go and then you also just learn about it by just doing and managing your own finances and being proactive about it versus just kind of putting things on a credit card, not thinking about it. Let's see. Will America be dog free? No. I think dogs will always be in the United States. They're still probably the most popular pets. I certainly prefer dogs over cats. I don't really see them going anywhere. Does dog culture make you more poor? No, I don't think dog culture makes you poor. Like, there are some people who probably spoil their dogs and spend too much money on them. Often it's a substitution for kids or grandkids for certain people, but uh, no, I don't think you're gonna go. You don't. I don't think getting a dog is so expensive. It's gonna make you poor just if you raise a dog in a relatively normal way. I personally don't want a dog until I have enough space for one to run around, like a proper backyard. That's the reason why I don't have one at this point in my life. I think you should probably get married, either rent or have a house or buy a house with a big enough yard and have kids probably before getting a dog, in my personal opinion. But nevertheless, I do want to have a dog and have one be a permanent part of my family once I've hit those other benchmarks. Did you do anything to personally celebrate? Fancy dinner, new stuff, etc. Um, I mean, I'm thinking about having a 100,000 subscriber party here in Orange County. I've just been traveling a lot. Like I literally hit the 100,000 when I was in Australia. So I guess I enjoyed my vacation part of in Australia to a certain degree, and my trip out there, even though it wasn't entirely a vacation. I mean, a lot of it is the fact that I was speaking, but nevertheless, yeah, I haven't done anything yet. I've been just too busy. I eventually kind of want to do something. No video on the Clarity Act. I don't really think I think there are people who can probably make a better video than me on that. So that's why I haven't done it. Why do you dismiss Fed Reserve currencies or not currencies or not go into detail of the books about it? Well, because there are a lot of financial conspiracies. I just think that a lot of the Fed ones, at least the ones in Shadow Men, are just not accurate. And I have to reread it to remember what parts of it were not accurate because I read that book several years ago. Let's see. I have this problem in general. Let me know if you guys have it, where I read a lot of stuff and I know certain things to be facts, but I don't remember exactly where I got it from. So it's difficult for me to cite the exact place. And so it's kind of like, that's kind of where I struggle sometimes with some of these. So it takes me time just to research where I got the idea, even though I know the idea is true. Let's see. Whether it makes, okay, you gave me the follow-up. Whether it makes sense to get into creative pursuits. No, it doesn't yet. There are reputable businesses doing that. Okay, so I mean, it's not really in general, from an investment perspective, creative pursuits generally are not the best investments. They have very high failure rates and they rely on a relatively fickle sentiment of popular culture and demand. I think that creative pursuits should be done on your own. Like if you have like the interest in doing it, like, and then and I think it might be worthwhile investing in your own creative pursuits because even if they don't become a hit financially, at least you've expressed yourself creatively and shared certain ideas, whether it's story, whether it's your philosophy, whether it's music or art, and kind of got it out there. There's a whole art economy thing too when it comes to like the tax implications of that, but that is an entirely different conversation. But I generally think that putting money into creative industries and project is more of a passion project than an ROI project. Let's see. I've heard that someone talk about how Ford paid workers $5 to $6 a day, which based on the price of gold at the time would be 150 to 25K a month. Is that a fair comparison? Not entirely, because gold is very volatile and it might be at the upswing of it. So it depends on when you started it. Like, for example, if you look at gold versus inflation, if you start the start date at 1971, it shows a much higher result than if you use 1980 as your start point. So it's not perfectly correlated, but it's probably better correlated than if you just did a straight CPI. I think the number's somewhere in between, honestly. let's see. Yeah, thoughts on more manufacturing coming back due to crackdown on immigration, national security. Also, your thoughts on the need for a healthier population for society. Um, yeah, I think manufacturing is kind of coming back, and it's because of a number of factors. One, less immigration. Two, robots becoming and software making it so you just need less people in general, and labor is no longer the bottleneck. Nick is the GOAT. Thank you for the super chat. Um, yeah, and so that so I think that labor is no longer the bottleneck, and it's not because of robotics and AI that the main thing that drives marginal costs for manufacturing is now energy, and the U.S. has some of the lowest energy costs in the world, and so therefore American um, manufacturing is a lot more competitive now than it used to be because the labor is a smaller percentage of the cost profile. Um, and I think a lot, it's just, you're not going to have the old jobs where you've got paid $100,000 a year to turn a wrench at a car factory. That's never coming back. But manufacturing is going to come back, and you're going to have a few specialty jobs needed to maintain and fix the robots or construct these new factories and manage the peopleless factories. Like but it's not going to be this. They're going to be higher paying at fewer jobs that result in the manufacturing renaissance of the U.S. I think the Rust Belt's a good candidate to bring it back, just simply because land is cheap there, and it's close enough to major waterways such as the Great Lakes that can go out in the Atlantic, or the Mississippi River Delta that can go out into the Gulf of Mexico. I think Texas will be another manufacturing hub in the future. I think Southern California will be as well, even despite California trying to push out of all its businesses because of its access to the Pacific Ocean and being the hub of trans-Pacific trade. And then I think the other one will be like some of the southern states like Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Tennessee, etc. will probably be the other kind of manufacturing hub. I don't see manufacturing coming back to the Northeast or to Florida in large scale, but those other parts of the country, I think, will probably be where I think the manufacturing renaissance would take place. And then also from a geopolitical imperative, because the world is not as globally high trust to a certain degree, and countries are more likely to be protectionist or be on more geopolitical risk feels more real. There's going to be probably mandates to make certain products in the U.S. if they're not there already. So yeah, I'm generally optimistic about the future of manufacturing output, but not necessarily manufacturing employment, if that answers your question. And the need for a healthier population. Oh yeah, that would solve most of our social problems, whether it's the fact that you have like housing being unaffordable, or retirement being more difficult, or people starting families later. Like those aren't problems if your whole lifespan is longer. So like say for example, if you in the old days and you had your family at 25 years old and you only lived till 60, well, that's like 5/12 of your life, which is about 37. I'm just going to do a quick calculation on about just make sure I get the right number here. 5 divided by 12. Okay, so 41% of your life is the point when you have your first kid, and you're 25 and live till 60. But now, let's just say, for example, people will be living now to like 90, especially if you're in the top 10% of income earners. You're going to live to at least 90 based on the actuarial data. So if you lived at 41% of your life at 90, that means you have your first kid at 37 years old. Is the same as having your first kid at 25 if you live till 60. And I think increasing longevity, I think aging should be classified as a disease for government research purposes. I've talked a lot about longevity. Like my last speech in Seattle was about this. I had a discussion in Vegas with my friend Sean, who's in that industry, about this kind of thing in some of my older videos. But like, it doesn't, like, if you buy your first house at 40 and live to 120, it's the same as somebody buying their first house at 25 and living till 70 or 60. Like, it's the longer lifespans mean it doesn't matter that it takes you a little bit longer to get the benchmark, because you'll have the same, if not more, amount of years at that certain level of success. It's just the world is more complex these days, and you have people living longer, so it just delays the timelines for things, but doesn't necessarily end the timeline for things. There might be some social adjustments that have to be made for people living longer and healthier. And given a lot of recent pharmaceutical developments, like, a lot of lifestyle diseases can be reduced heavily because of GLPs and other factors as well, and just general fitness awareness. So, like, my goal personally is to make it to 113 years old at minimum, so I can live. I have a specific reason that I want to do that, but yeah, I think that's kind of the solution. I think we can fix a lot of I think healthy society is critical. And if you just add the, if you add 1 year of lifespan on average for the entire world, so like right now, like the average lifespan is 74 years old for the entire world. If you just make that from 74 to 75, that increases global GDP by $16 trillion, which is more than half of the US GDP, just by 1 year increased life expectancy. And if we increase that even longer, there's going to be a lot more wealth to be created by that. Yeah. So that goes. Now let's see. Next question. Financial entrepreneur here, dude. Just started research on data science. Number one advice for any student in their final year of study. First of all, if you haven't done so, figure out what you want to do within finance, or like what your goal at 40 is, and work your way backward. If you have done that, figure out where you're going to live. If you're going to live in the same place that you're going to school, use this time to start networking in advance with people who can help you with your career search or your business goals long run. The longer you plant, the earlier you plant your flag in the community and make connections, the faster you can have success later in life. How do you handle the conspiracy-dominated internet trolls? That's a good question. I mean, I have to take everything I see on the internet with a grain of salt. It's really frustrating. You lead social media, particularly on X, where half the posts now are basically just people posting fake stories, and the first comment is, at Grok, is this true? And then you click and it's like, no, it's not. And like, I just have to assume that nothing that I see on the internet, whether even it's video footage because of AI, is real, unless if I verify it through some other means. I don't really run into that many conspiracy internet trolls in real life. I have talked to some few conspiracy people, and I try to explain like that there are figure out what their underlying assumptions are. And if they don't make sense, I point that out. The other thing too with conspiracies is that somebody who believes in every conspiracy theory is true is just as, for lack of a better term, indoctrinated as somebody who believes that every conspiracy theory is false. Like, if you just take one side of the coin on this every time, that's not critical thinking. That's just one intrinsic bias over another intrinsic bias. Yeah. How fast do you read? Are you speed read maxing? Like, when I listen to audiobooks, it's usually at 1.5x. If it's a particular fast speaker, I lower it to 1.2x. When I read, I don't really count like the pages per minute that I'm reading, so I don't know how fast I'm reading. But I generally are probably faster than average reader. When I get my peak, I used to read like one new book every week. Now I just don't have time to do so. So I'm more in that doing action stage of my life. Speaking of books, there's actually one book I forgot to share with you guys, which is probably the most interesting book. And this is the Bernese Wappen book. It's an old book from the 1930s where I inherited it from my family, which basically is the coat of arms of every family in Bern. I'm not going to go through every page here. Maybe I'll do a separate live stream where I go through the Whopping book. But here's like an example of all of the Bernese families that are allowed to participate in local elections with their family crests. It's really interesting. This it's a 100-year-old book that I inherited from my family about this stuff. And yeah, I should have shared that earlier on the live stream, but I guess you guys get a bonus for staying on this long. Let's see. Next question. What do you think the line between AI just becoming another productivity tool and actually eliminating jobs? Well, it's doing both right now. We're already there. Do you think we're in another Gilded Age? No, I think the 2010s and were probably more of the Gilded Age than now. Like, I think inequality metrics have started to decline, and wage growth post 2020 has been higher at the bottom end than the upper end. So I think the closest we had to the Gilded Age were always like the 2010s, like Obama years and Trump's first term. But like now, I think that we're out of the golden age. I think we're already out of it, and people will look back and say like we lived through it already. Is UBI for 2/3 of people in 20 years going to be everyone in a 400 square foot apartment, robot, house cleaner, cook, junk food delivery, don't? Yeah, there's a chance of that world. That's what like somebody like AOC would want if she was president of the United States. Like basically, except instead of an apartment, it'd be more like a dorm room because of budget costs. But everybody would live like a freshman at UC Santa Barbara. Like you would have a place to live, you'd have all the food you'd want, you'd have health care, you would probably have like some activities, whether it's college classes or some other thing to keep you distracted during the day, and social media, and maybe a little bit of money left over to go out, have a fun night on the town. But there won't be enough money to actually accomplish anything real or to have a family. And so as a result, that's kind of the dystopian, like perma college student life, which is what I think a lot of the millennial left wants, because a lot of their lives probably peaked when they were in college for a variety of reasons. They want to go back to that world because they were happier back then. But that's a whole nother video. And I think I've talked about this in my video, Millennial Socialism Explained, in my live stream about Mondami, if you want to see more on that. Let's see. Thanks for coming from Singapore. Singapore is my most popular city in Asia that people want me to go to. But until I have like at least like probably 100 people who'd want to come see me in Singapore for a speech, the logistics don't make sense for me to head out there at this point. Let's see. At what net worth does it make sense to pursue creative stuff? I mean, there's not really a net worth level. It's just whether you have the time and the money to build the project you want to build. You can write a book for free, basically. Just all you need is a word processor, and you can use ChatGPT to edit for you. Like, I think in the age of AI, the minimum cost of doing a lot of these creative projects is dropping precipitously. Like the YouTube, like my budget originally was just basically a webcam, a microphone, and my computer. Like the cost of creative projects, just unless you're trying to film like a studio quality production, I wouldn't really be too concerned about that. It's more of a time thing and energy thing. Let's see. Any advice on handling the psychological load of being a state's heir? Okay, sorry. I think I got disconnected temporarily. So now I'm back. So let's see. Let's back to this question. I'm learning not as much to mess up. A lot of people depend on my family, and the big money feels scary. Well, I need to know more about your personal situation, honestly. And if you want to talk more about it, we can have a private conversation about that. I'll send a link to my my form that you can fill out specific questions, because when you get to these levels of wealth, it's very different situations depending on the industries you're in. But the thing is, I think one thing to help is that you should think of monetary decisions not based on absolute dollar amounts, but percentage of your net worth at that point. It's like if you have a stock portfolio, like I don't really have any psychological difference from me trading, say, $10,000 versus $10 million, because I don't think of the dollar, the movements in the market in terms of the hard dollar. So like if I think of it as a percentage, so if that's like whether from 10 million, that's 100,000 down, but it's the same as losing 100 on a $10,000 portfolio. So I think that's one kind of thing you look at. Think of your decisions not in terms of hard dollars, look at it as percentage of your net worth. But yeah, I think if you want to have a more of a, I think this is a topic that I think you need more of a private conversation, honestly. Um, let's see. What's it called? I have no fear of bad mouthing the Fed. I've done so probably several times. It's just, I'm not going to just believe like a conspiracy just because it is the enemy of my enemy in a way. Let's see. How will high employment be? Because of AI or in the next business cycle? Because I think this next business recession, unemployment rate is probably going to be relatively low because of demographic factors, mainly boomers retiring faster than jobs are destroyed. But like in future business cycles, that might be a completely different story. Um, yeah. Let's see. What's Nick's point of view on books related to Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett? I like Poor Charlie's Almanac. It's a great book. I haven't really read any other ones really about those two. What innovation is coming out of there? The best SoCal inks not in a master plan. Yeah, there's still plenty of good big startups that have come out of here. Like Rivian is a more recent one that's not in the book. Like Anduril was also built here in Orange County, and those are two relatively big tech companies that have come out of Orange County in the last 10 years or so. So I don't think, and there's still plenty of a startup culture. It's not say as robust as Silicon Valley, but it never has been in terms of the tech world. But the entrepreneurial spirit is still here because it's relatively the most business friendly place in coastal California. Um, shouldn't you expect the average lifespan will go down as the middle class shrinks or disappears? No, because a lot of the shrinking of the middle class is people moving to higher classes, for one. And two, lifestyle, medical technology is getting better. And the longer the new technology exists, it's going to get cheaper. And so as a result, you'll have more access to life extension technology as the longer it's on the market. So I think you're wrong on that one. Let's see. Was your family royalty? No, my family was not royalty. Switzerland doesn't have a royal family. And on my father's side of the family, it was mostly people in middle class background, except for my Portuguese ancestors who were relatively poor farmers in the Azores. So, yeah, I mean, there is some wealth in my family, but they're from a country that did not have a royal family. So, yeah. Um, let's see. Thoughts on 48 Laws of Power? Um, I mean, I read it in high school. It's kind of the book that an edgy teenager would like a lot. It's kind of just goes in like the cynical, like brute force factors of driving life. I mean, it's an interesting read, but if you live your whole life based on 48 Laws of Power, you're probably going to not have a miserable existence, to be quite frank. I also have heard it's like one of the most popular books to read that are read in prisons of all places too. Um, best career options to people with ADHD. Um, let's see. I mean, back in the before the age of AI, I would say like a high frequency, like type trading, but I don't really know the answer to that, honestly. Let's see. I have I'm probably gonna go for another 10 minutes or so. Um, if I assuming I get enough questions to keep going. So if you want me to keep chatting, feel free to ask me some more questions. Um, I've already talked about the bookshelf, so you can scroll earlier if you haven't seen that. I even showed you guys a little bit of the Wappen book. And if you want me to break down go through the Wappen book on a future live stream, feel free to write that in the chat. I also have the silver play button now for hitting 100,000. I don't know, it's inverted, but 100,000 subscribers. And I'd like to thank you guys all. Oh, that reminds me. I have to do acknowledgements. I almost forgot because there's a lot of people who've helped me get to the level that this channel has. It's not built solely on me. And so now it's time for some acknowledgements. And after the acknowledgements, I'll take questions. First, I'd like to thank my fiance. She's been supportive of me, and she actually inspired the Pearl Drift series indirectly. And if you come to a meetup, I'll tell you the story of how she did. But like, if it wasn't for her being in my life, those videos would have never been made. Next one is just my friends and family in general. They've always been supportive of me in my life, and I'm thankful for having them all. Next is my clients for Spearhead, whether they found me through YouTube, which some of them have, or elsewhere. I'm not going to say any of you guys' names out of privacy, but yeah, I appreciate all those who've trusted me to help manage their financial future, and my team sort of helping you with that. And if you think we're doing a good job, I'm always open to referrals on that front. But thank you guys all for supporting the firm. Next, I'd like to thank my personal friend, Nick Codner. He's traveled with me to half of the meetups probably across the world. He's come to Zurich and Florida and Seattle and a bunch of other places with me. And he's filmed a lot of this, helped me with a lot of the filming and production and things like that. If it wasn't for him, it probably wouldn't have a lot of the good videos that I've made while on tour. So I'd like to give him a personal shout out. And that's also a funny thing I've noticed with the tour is a lot of people who go to like one event have met me in cities on the other side of the country or even the other side of the world. And it's kind of developing into like a community of like internationally or just well-traveled people who are intellectual and want to be part of interesting conversations. So yeah, for all of those who have traveled from their home city to come to one of my meetups, it's awesome. You've made the experience a lot better for being there. In addition, I'd also like to thank my friend Ben Beery, which you guys probably know who he is because I've appeared on his podcast and like it's called The Authentic Journey. What's it called? I'm just going to try to find the YouTube link so you can check out like his stuff is more, I would say, about motivation and entrepreneurship and like living your true authentic self. I think that I can't really load the link up here right now, but it's The Authentic Journey. I do recommend you guys check them out on YouTube. I'll probably do more collaborations with Ben in the future. Yeah, I'd like to thank. So he's another one who I'd like to thank. He's on top of that. I'd like to thank my friend Skylar Lifschultz, who has been a supporter of like the channel. Like he started a group in Orange County called the Saturday Salon, which hosts like these monthly intellectual discussion meetups. And I've been a speaker at several of those. You've probably seen the room with the red walls and some of my channels. That's where that is. And he's built a nice little community of debate and discussion. So I'd like to give him a shout out, and some of the other people helping with the salon, such as Fatih and Sean, um, and the whole rest of the Saturday Salon crew. I'd like to thank my spearhead team, which includes my business partners, David, Murphy, and Samantha. Murphy has appeared on several videos on this channel, mainly a lot of the deep dives in industry sectors and things like that, and Kaylin as well. If they're all been critical. I'd also like to thank my friend Alec, who inspired me to do the private dinners. I'd like to thank all the commenters, just in general, who's ever commented on a video or on a live stream. It's helped keep me going all of these times. And I'd also like to thank what's it called? All anybody who's ever come to a meetup or a private dinner. It's been awesome to meet you guys in person. I've felt a lot of new friends from going on this tour, and it's really enriching part of my life. Like, it really adds a lot to my travels, and has been really a really great experience. And I hope it continues. And then I also like to thank some people who I've met on the road who've helped host events for me, such as here in Newport and in San Diego and in Zurich and a variety of other places. Like, a lot of these cities, I don't know any people, and also Palm Beach. And like I don't know a lot of these cities that well. And if it wasn't for you guys helping me in terms of finding venues and organizing a lot of logistics, I wouldn't have made me able to do a lot of these events. So yeah, and that's, I'm not going to name names because I didn't ask you guys in advance whether you wanted your names on the air. So I want to thank my friend Elliot Thompson, who's the voice of Old Money. Like, I remember my videos where I do all those quotes with like the gentleman's voice. That's not mine. That kind of sounds that sounds pretty classy and pithy. That's my friend Elliot. He's let me use his voice to do the quotes. So I got to thank him. And I got to thank my friend Brian Piotr, who's also inspired me a lot in my creative journey, because we've built different platforms relatively at the same time. Mine more in finance, and he's been more in the world of politics and homeschooling. I'd also like to thank my friend Sean, who did the video with me about longevity. I'd like to thank all of my guests on this channel, including Chris Street, who is my first regular guest. I don't know, you guys, my OG listeners, probably know who Chris Street is. He's a former treasurer of Orange County who has very kind of out there but thought-provoking opinions on a lot of things in macroeconomics and geopolitics. And I'll likely bring him back on the show and maybe have him speak at a few events on the tour later this year. But I'd like to thank Chris and all my guests. And also I'd just like to thank God and Lord Christ and all of that, inspiring me and to be a good example to all you guys and anybody who I've forgotten to mention, honestly, because there's probably a lot of people who I probably should acknowledge that I might not remember. So I'd like to leave this as a catch-all for all of you guys too. And yeah, now with that, here's a super chat. Not advice, not advice. What are your thoughts on the Fed's nominee changing course and the immediate consequences from Jared Powell's steadiness? I mean, I think Warsh is not as dovish as what the market was hoping or fearing for. So, and especially if, say, for example, the Democrats take over in 29, I expect Warsh to probably hike rates, because he seems to be more of a hawk when it comes to inflation. So, but a lot of people think he'll just do what Trump wants him to do to avoid getting fired. But he had to appoint somebody who wasn't going to be a stooge, because otherwise it wouldn't have made it through the Senate. So it's kind of a complicated thing. But yeah, that's my take on Warsh. I'm generally positive on him so far, but it's too early to say because he hasn't been in office yet. Do you think there'll be any big players that emerge and compete against NVIDIA? If so, what would you expect the ETA, and would it be for GPUs and other tech that supersedes it? Yeah, I think there will be. I think other semis will catch up. I don't know which companies will be the ones who do it. If I did, I'd be investing in them right now. But yeah, that's my take on on that. They're going to come. It's just a matter of when. Are you optimistic for the average worker who's not capable of being an entrepreneur? Not really, to be quite frank. Like everybody, no matter if they're a corporate worker or a business owner, is going to have to become more entrepreneurial. We're shifting to a world and an economy of the artisan versus the factory worker. Like the Industrial Revolution took away the skilled artisans and moved the world to more repeatable, rote, mechanical work, like with the development. But now with AI and robots, like a lot of the repeatable rote work is going to be able to be done better by machines than people. And so as a result, like the way you're going to have to develop a niche is through creativity, which is inherently entrepreneurial. You're going to have to be creative and adapt or die, honestly. And the question is agency something that can be learned or not? I honestly don't know the answer to that, but it's something that keeps me up at night, because if it can't be learned, there's a lot of negative political consequences to that. What's the best sub industry to do tech sales in? Probably right now it's robotics. I mean, that changes depending on what technology is on a certain path, part of the Gartner hype cycle and the adoption curve. But if I had to do one right now, it'd be robotics. Physical robots, particularly, because I think AI is already far enough in the hype cycle that if you're starting a new career now, you might have already missed a lot of the wave. Traveling with Nick. Well, yeah, if I was going to do a second YouTube channel, I just don't have time because I'm busy with my business and my personal life and this channel. But if I was going to make a second channel, I would make one all about travel and my comments about where I've been, travel, like reviews, using like my socioeconomic analysis and applying it to the places I go. It'd kind of be like a Republican / finance bro version of Rick Steves, is what I've thought about doing as like my second channel, but I just quite frankly do not have the time to do it right now. But I think there's like a niche in travel that's missing, particularly for like a creators who want to cater to like the middle to upper middle class traveler who's not trying to either do it on the cheapest budget possible or the most bougie, like 6-star experience possible. Like the person who's making $150,000 to $400,000 a year who wants to go on a nice vacation with his or her spouse or family. There's not really, or even by themselves if they're younger in their 20s. There's not really a market for that. Like somebody wants a few creature comforts but can't afford the most extravagant stuff and doesn't really interested in all like the left coded like travel ideology that's baked into the cake. Like I think if I was going to make a channel, I think I would do something like a second channel would be something like that. Yeah. Do you think that a DBA versus a PhD? I've never heard of a DBA. I've heard of an MBA. Is this like a foreign country thing? I've never seen a doctorate in business administration in the United States. Maybe if you want to be a business professor, maybe that's it. But I'm talking about like used for professionals other than business. Yeah. Thanks. I will look forward to seeing you in Dallas too. Do you think manufacturing in an industry that people glance over, especially engineers who have potential to be entrepreneurs? Yeah, I think you'll be able to run a factory. A family business will be able to operate a factory because of AI and robotics. Like that's the future. Like you'll have like, for example, I don't know, you want to make silver play button plaques. Like, and there's one company I think that does it, but like there could be like theoretically a family that builds a factory that specializes in making these kind of plaques and does it better than anybody else. And they use AI for most of their white collar work that previously needed corporate middle managers. And they use robots to make the stuff and do the shipping and logistics. I think you'll be able to literally build like a full scale manufacturing business with a family or maybe a few extra employees. That's what I mean by like the artisan economy. I know you've made videos on California before, but the next 5 years, what are the key pain and potential solutions? I mean, I think the key pain point is what happens to the public finances when the NASDAQ has 2 down years in a row. We haven't seen that since 2003, I think. So, and the NASDAQ and as a proxy, just tech in general, booming and all the equity in that supports public finances. So how's the business model or the revenue for California going to be able to adapt in a world that they can't just count on perpetually compounding NASDAQ returns? I don't know. There's not really much to say that's different than I did in my previous videos about California. So that's why I haven't really made any yet. What's your take on the Bible? Well, it's the word of God. That's not really like, yeah, I'm not really like a literalist necessarily, but it is the word of God. I have the standard Catholic view on what the Bible is. So yeah. Though now, first of all, I just like to say again, thank you everybody. And since it's been a while since I've been on the chat, I'll send reminders for a few key things. Like, if you want to check out, we have our Substack. If you want to check out my reading list or just stay updated on things with the channel, whether it's new videos or events or things like that. We have a lot of meetups coming up. I am going to Seattle tomorrow to speak. And then I will be in San Francisco on the 28th, Saturday in March. And then we're going to Toronto on Thursday, April 9th. This will probably be the only time I will be coming to Toronto from the tour. So for those in Ontario, this is your chance. Then I am going back to Boston on Saturday, April 11th. And then we're going to have New York on Tuesday, April 14th. And we'll also have a private dinner in New York on Sunday, the 12th. And then we have a private dinner in Montecito on the 29th of March and attached to all the other events. So if you're interested in applying to a private dinner, here's the link. And then I am going to be going to Atlanta on April 23rd. That's the only one we're doing in the South this year. Unless if you count Texas as the South, but like the deep South. And then Chicago, we are going on April 25th. And then Kansas City on May 3rd. And then Dallas on April 30th. And we'll probably do some other ones in Texas and Colorado and Nevada and maybe Oregon later this year. But these are and maybe Quebec, but these are the ones on the calendar for now. And if you want to have an impact on where I go, feel free to vote on where you think I should attend. And if you have specific questions for me, like whether about investments or whatever, and you could either schedule a consultation with me through my consultation form or a private call through my Calendly. And we're also going to be expanding the short form content via my other social media, such as my X and my Instagram and my LinkedIn, because I don't want to flood this channel with shorts. What's it called? That's really all I've got to say. And unless I don't know if I have any more questions here in the queue, so I will wrap it up. But before I go, I want to ask you guys one question. First of all, two questions actually. One, what resonates you with most with this channel? Like, why do you guys keep coming back? And second, what are some things you would like me to talk about and do a deep dive of on a future live stream? Because I like the newer format where I have like a 45-minute lecture or 30-minute lecture that I go into a specific topic and then open it up to Q&A. I think it makes it more interesting than me just randomly answering whatever happens to pop up on the chat. So if you can leave in your chat the answers to either one of those two questions before I take off, that will be appreciated. And I'm going to scroll to see if I missed any questions, but otherwise I think I might end this live stream because I got to pack for Seattle and I have other things to do. Let's see. Yeah, I think that's gonna wrap it up, everybody. But thank you guys all for watching. Have a great rest of your evening, and uh, a good weekend. And yeah, I hope to see you guys on future live streams and in person on the tour as well. And keep supporting the channel if you like it. Um, share share the channel with your friends and family, and help us grow. But yeah, thank you guys all for watching. Have a good night.